morning. It's actually not the morning where I am, but whatever. Cool. So this lesson we're going to be moving on from white keys. If you feel that you haven't mastered white keys yet, don't quite worry about that. As long as you know the 7 names and have some way of figuring out, even if it's not lightning fast, that's kind of all you need at this step. But we're going to move on. So remember, our musical alphabet is only 7 letters, right? We have A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. And then it just repeats over and over again, which, depending on how new you are to the musical alphabet, that can kind of be a weird thing to think about ABCDEFG, ABCDEFG. So, just keep working at it. The more you do it, the more familiar you'll be with it. If you think back to when you first started, I'm sure you used to struggle a lot with all that stuff, and now you should feel more able to find stuff. So, if you're ever doubting yourself, just kind of remind yourself of, where you were and how far you've come, even if it's only a few baby steps. We are going to be talking about distances in music, and also distances on the keyboard. So in music, we have these things called half steps and whole steps, and they're pretty important to be able to talk about and to have a good understanding about. I would recommend, I'm going to write all the stuff I have on the paper in the description of the video. So I would recommend right now that you pause the video and kind of just look at the description, and if you have a piece of paper or something to take notes on, it might be a good idea to write that down. And even if you don't necessarily understand what I have written, it might make it easier as I'm talking about it for you to process and understand what I'm talking about as we're going through the video, if you've taken the time to kind of at least read through it and or write it down for your own reference. Cool. So if we play any given note and go to any other different note, there's usually some sort of specific name for that interval. So today we're just going to talk about 2 of those names, half steps and whole steps. And these are very specific intervals, but at the same time they're also very generic intervals. And when we get more advanced, I'll talk about what that means. But these are very basic, and the first things you should understand, even before maybe even reading music, you should understand what a whole step and half step is. So if we start at C, feel free to play a C, and we look at this C key, half steps and whole steps are our 2 smallest intervals that we have. So let's talk about the half step first, because the half step is the one you really need to understand in order to really know what a whole step is. So a half step is when we start at any given note. In this case, I'm on C, and we go from that note that we are on to the next available note / key, either up or down. So if we look at the keyboard here, I'm on the C. If I want to go up, in this case to the right, higher in pitch, I would go this way, right? So now I'm going to look for the next immediate key, and it's this black key right here, right? So make sure when you're looking for the next immediate key that you are acknowledging the black keys, which you should be very good at, right? We've done those 2-3 keys, so you're not ignoring the black keys, even though we have only been talking about the names of the white keys. So if I start on this C and I go to the next available key up, that is a half step going up. So this interval right here is a half step. I'm going to explain that 2 more times, just kind of in the same fashion, right? So let's pick a different note. We're going to start with an F. So if I go to this F, right, remember to find F natural, we go to the group of 3, and to the left is F natural. And I want to go a half step up, I need to look for the next immediate key to the right, or in this case, higher pitch. So if I'm looking at this key, the next available key is this black key right here. So from here to here is a half step. Let's talk about descending half steps, and it's the same thing, right? So let's go back to our C. If I want to go down a half step, I'm going to look at this key and look for the next available key to the left or descending in pitch. In this case, it's another white key. So from C to B is a half step. Let's do one more of a descending. Let's say I pick this key right here, which we don't know the name of yet, but let's say I pick this key and I want to go a half step down. I need to look at this key and look for the next immediate key to its left, so it's descending in pitch. In that case, it would be this D natural. Let's talk about one more thing that can happen half step wise, which we kind of just mentioned very briefly. Let's say I start on E natural. Remember, to find E natural, we're going to go to the group of 2, and E natural is to the right. Or if you want to find C, if that's where you're really comfortable and you want to walk up to E, C, D, E, that's absolutely fine. Whatever method you're using is fine. As long as you practice it, eventually, this will become very second nature. So use whatever is most comfortable for you for finding those notes. So we're on E, right? Let's say I want to go a half step up to the right, ascending in pitch. In this case, there's no black key in between these two white keys. So from white key to white key, this is a half step. And we talked about this a little briefly when we were doing C and B, right? There's no black key here. So from these two white keys, that's also a half step. So C and B and E and F sometimes have special rules when we're talking about whole steps and half steps. Let's do one more. Let's pick this key right here. So we're in the group of 3, we're playing the middle one. I'm not going to give the answer, I'm just going to ask you to do it. So we're hitting this key, we don't know the name of it, but that's okay. We're in the group of 3, that middle key. Play what would be a half step up from this key. So if we're going a half step up, remember we're going to the right on the keyboard so we can ascend in pitch. So this key right here would be a half step up from this middle key in the group of 3. Now on the same key, here, let me review that real quick. Right, so remember, if you had trouble figuring that out, remember we're going onto this key and we're looking for the next available key, not skipping any keys, to the right. In that case, it's this white key. So staying on that same black key, the group of 3, the middle key, if we're going to go a half step down, what key would that be? So remember, to find a half step down, now we're going to the left so we can descend in pitch. So we're looking for the next available key. There's not going to be any keys in between the two keys we're hitting to go a half step down. In that case, it's the G natural. Cool. So that might seem overwhelming, and it's not always super important to know what the whole step, what's a half step constantly when you're reading music or anything like that. But you do need to understand what half steps are in order to understand the construction of some of the exercises we're going to do and to understand the building blocks of reading music. Half steps are often notated with these things we call sharps and flats. If you put a sharp in front of any given note, that means to go up a half step, right? So if I had a C and I put a sharp in front of it, that means I need to raise that C natural up one half step, right? So that means I would go to C and I need to raise it up one half step. And then if we're going to lower something a half step, that's called a flat. And it's represented by a lowercase b. It looks like a lowercase b, which can kind of be confusing if you're like typing about music. But if we are when we lower things by half steps, that's called making it, adding a flat. So if we're on that C, and now we call the C C flat, that means that we need to go a half step down from what C is. And in that case, it's actually this B natural, right? Because if we're going one half step lower than C natural, there's no one keys in between this, that's a half step down. So this B natural key here can also sometimes be called C flat, depending on the context of the music you're looking at. Cool. So I'm going to review half steps one more time. So remember, our definition of a half step is when we start on any given note and either go up or down to the next available note, right? So if I'm on this, the next available notes up and down are the black keys on either side. If it is called a sharp, that is going up a half step. If it's called a flat, we are going down a half step. So I mentioned very briefly that, I think I mentioned it at least twice, but if I didn't, I'm going to mention it again. The reason we start with the white keys is because most of the white keys, not all of them, but most of them, well, it depends on context as well, but most of them pretty commonly only have one name. And if you're learning an instrument that isn't piano, this actually gets confusing at some point because you'll see certain combinations of flats or sharps, and it can be confusing because you're not understanding that music notation is really based off of keyboard instruments where you can kind of see things. For instance, trumpet, right? There's not really a key system that's kind of having such a visual way of learning what whole steps and half steps are. So usually when people teach whole steps and half steps, even if you're not learning piano, they print off a piano keyboard worksheet and have students learn from that. So these black keys almost always have two different names. Certainly, usually one name is more common than the other, and you can certainly expect it to be called something depending on the context of the music you're playing. But let's talk about the sharp version of these names. So remember, sharps is when we go up a half step, right? So let's start with C. So if we want to raise C a half step, if we want to make it C sharp, we need to go up to the next immediate key to the right, which is this black key right here. So one name for this black key, so if we're looking at the group of two, this black key right here is C sharp because it's a half step higher than C natural. So it's C sharp. So let's talk about this black key, right? We want to learn the sharp name for it. So if we start at this D natural and we want to go up a half step and make it D sharp, we're going to go to the right one key with no key in between. So this black key right here can be called D sharp because it is a half step higher than D natural. If this is getting overwhelming or too much, please pause the video as you're going and feel free to take notes. It might even be worth it to kind of draw out, I have stuff on the back of this. Anyway, to draw out a keyboard and kind of write down the labels that I'm talking about if you feel you are struggling in understanding these things. At any given point, feel free to rewind the video too if you feel like you're missing something or if I'm going too fast. I'm trying to keep the videos short. Generally a half-hour video can take like 3 hours to upload, so I'm trying to keep them on the shorter side, so I don't mean to rush, but I might be going a little faster than I would say if I was doing it in person. But let's keep going. So let's talk about the group of three. So if we start on this F natural and we want to make it F sharp, we need to go to the right one key, right, which is this black key. So this black key right here can be called F sharp. And that would be notated, I haven't talked about this on all the, but that would be notated if you're writing it by hand. That would be notated by the letter F followed by a hashtag. And this hashtag or pound symbol right here is called a sharp. So if I was talking about F sharp, this is how you would see it written in letter form. You would see this. Very rarely would I say that someone would actually write out the word sharp. Usually you're going to see this symbol, especially if it's in a musical context or a musician themselves is talking about it. Generally, if it's written out, maybe it's someone who's not very experienced or they don't know how to get the pound symbol out of their computer. That would be one of those. We'll see if I'm able to do it when I upload this in the description. Cool. So this, in the group of three, that first key can be called F sharp. So now let's talk about this black key, right? So if we're on this G natural right here, and we want to go up a half step and make it G sharp, right, which would be written G with the pound symbol or hashtag, however you want to think about it, it would be this key because it's immediately to the right of it and there's no keys in between it. So this key right here is called G sharp, or it can be called G sharp. And let's talk about the last of the group of three. So if we're on this A natural, and we want to make it A sharp, which would be written A hashtag or A pound symbol, however you want to think about it, or A sharp if you want to think of it in the most musical way possible, right? We would go to the right to the next immediate key, which is this black key in the group of three. There's no keys in between it, and it's the next possible option. This black key right here would be called A sharp, or it can be called A sharp. So the reason I keep saying that these keys can be called that is because you can go down a half step to all of these keys as well, and they have a flat name as well. So let's talk about the flat names. So let's start with the group of three. Let's go to this B natural. Now, if we want to make this B natural B flat, which would be written B followed by a lowercase b, which is kind of confusing, but that's just what it is. It would look like this. B flat. This symbol right here represents flat, and it looks just like a lowercase b. I might write another one just so you don't think that I've written blah for no reason. But anyway, so let's say we're on this B natural right here, and we want to make it B flat, so we need to go down a half step. So we need to go down to the next immediate pitch, the next immediate key, and this key right here could be called B flat. So now it has two names, right? It can be called A sharp or B flat. It has two names. Now when a key or a note has multiple names, what we call that is enharmonics. Those are different names for the same sounding pitch or the same sounding note, right? So this key can be called A sharp or B flat. And A sharp and B flat have the same sounding note. Now some people, if you're Googling this, might be very annoying about this, and they'll be like, well actually B flat sounds different than an A sharp. No, it doesn't. That may have been true historically because pianos weren't agreed how to tune, but we tune to equal temperament now. They sound exactly the same. It is true that maybe depending on the context you can make them seem like they sound different, but they are producing the exact same sound waves. It can maybe seem different depending on context, which we'll talk about, but they sound exactly the same. And if you were practicing with a tuner, I don't know how you plan to play in tune if you think those notes sound different. So just be careful that a lot of people are kind of obnoxious about enharmonic stuff. But just know that enharmonics mean it's the same name for the different names for the same sounding note. On this key in particular, which we've been talking about, it could be B flat or A sharp. So let's go to the middle of the black keys, right? So if we go to the A natural right here, and we go down a half step, right, to the left to the next immediate key, which is that black key we were just talking about, this note can now be called A flat, right? Because it's a half step lower than A natural. So now this key also has two names, right? We have A flat or G sharp. And let me write that for you. Right, so we have a gunshot there. So we have this symbol right here, that lowercase b. Could maybe look like a 6 too if your handwriting's really sloppy like mine. Or even a half note, if you know what a half note is. It can kind of look like a half note. That symbol right there represents flat. And then we have this hashtag or pound sign that, or the number sign or the tic-tac-toe board. There's a few things you can call it if you really want. That represents sharp. I'm not really sure if that's going to focus, but we'll just hope. Right, so this key right here can be called A flat or G sharp. So let's keep going to this black key right here. So if we start at this G natural and we go down a half step, this black key right here can be called G flat. So now this key also has two names. It can be called G flat or F sharp. And calling it G flat or F sharp, those are called enharmonic equivalents or enharmonics. enharmonic. You know, I'm going to write that in the description, so hopefully it's there if I didn't already include that. But those are called enharmonics, when you have different names for the same sounding pitch or note. Cool, so now let's go to the group of 2. Now if we start at this E natural, and we want to make it E flat, we're going to go down a half step to the next immediate key. So this black key right here can be called E flat. So now this black key also has 2 different names, right? We can call it E flat or D sharp. And now let's go to the last black key. So if we start on this D natural and we want to make this D natural D flat, we're going to go down to the next immediate key. And this black key can now be called D flat. But it now also has 2 names, right? It can be called D flat or C sharp, depending on the context. So real quickly, if that was overwhelming, right now I'm going to review all the double names for all these black keys. So if you have your paper handy, if you're taking notes, feel free to write this down. So if we go to the group of 2, that first key in the group of 2 can be called C sharp or D flat. If we go to the group of 2, the second key in the group of 2 can be called E flat or D sharp. If we go to the group of 3, the first black key in the group of 3 can be called F sharp or G flat. If we go to the group of 3, the key in the middle can be called G sharp or A flat. And if we go to the group of 3, if we go to the right key, this key right here can be called A sharp or B flat. Cool. So feel free to pause and kind of write that down. It might even be, if this is really overwhelming, it might be even to your benefit to kind of rewind it and maybe even play through it 2 or 3 times. On musictheory.net, that piano quiz you've been doing, if you can't find it, if you just go to musictheory.net, go to exercises, scroll down to the piano one, you can go to the settings now, and you can add black keys to that quiz. Its standard setting is just the white keys, but you can now add the black keys as well. Cool. So far we've only talked about half steps, and there's still more in this lesson, right? So that can kind of seem overwhelming, but it's not. So we also have whole steps. A whole step is the distance of a half step. A whole step is the distance of 2 half steps in the same direction. So what do I mean by the same direction? So going a half step up and a half step down, that was just 2 half steps, but that is not a whole step. A whole step is 2 half steps in the same direction. So if we're on C, and we go 2 half steps up, from here to here is a whole step. The other way that you can see a whole step is if you hit 2 keys, there should be exactly 1 key in the middle. So if I hit A flat and B flat, there's exactly 1 key in between it. So from here to here is a whole step. If I hit C and D, there's 1 black key in between. So from C to D, that is a whole step. And it's the same thing descending. So if I start C and I want to go a whole step down, I'm going to do half step, half step. So from C to B flat or A sharp for its enharmonic equivalents, this is also a whole step. So let's kind of talk about the sounds. Half steps tend to be very strong, very evoking intervals. They might seem very boring now because I've been playing them without context. But if we have an ascending half step, this can usually invoke quite a bit of anger or hostile emotion in music. And you can hear this in the movie Jaws or the New World Symphony, right? Or if I add some sort of chord to it, right? In that case, every key was ascending a half step, a very aggressive sound. If we have a descending half step, this tends to be a much more sad sound. So if I add a chord to that. very sad. Or if I even use like a chordal change, that half step makes that chord so much sadder. Cool. Whole steps. Whole steps tend to be more neutral sounds. They don't tend to be quite as evoking or powerful as the use of half steps. But they can still have a pretty nice sound. But they're in general pretty plain. So right, if we have the C to D, kind of a neutral sound. Maybe I could improvise over the top of it, right? But it's a very neutral sound. And it's kind of the same thing with the descending half step as well. Very neutral sound, doesn't tend to evoke emotion as much. But in the context of chords, they can kind of have a nice effect, right? So if I have like a chord and then I go down a half step with one key, it tends to add a little more color. It doesn't necessarily evoke emotion, but it adds a more interesting color to it. And same thing if I go up a half step. I'm sorry, not a half step, a whole step. You know, it just adds color to that chord. And it can also kind of make things seem kind of adventurous. You know, it kind of has that very start of an adventure sound. But in general, whole steps are kind of a neutral sound. They're featured a lot. But these are our two basic intervals. We have half steps and whole steps, right? So our half step is our smallest distance, and our whole step is our next smallest distance. Remember, half steps up or down are represented with sharps or flats. And then there's one more symbol that you should be familiar with. It's called a natural, which you've heard me say many a time. It looks like this. That kind of lowercase b with like a q mixed together kind of thing. In general, they tend to be kind of angular, more like that. Almost like that's like a diamond. But that's a natural. What a natural does is on sheet music, it'll cancel out any previous flats or sharps to restore it to its white key original. So you've heard me in videos say like D natural a lot. That's just referring to the white keys. That's all. It's canceled out any flats or sharps that are possible. Is it necessary for me to say it like that? No, but I'm just in the habit of saying it like that all the time. Cool. So let's talk about a new warm-up I want you to do. So we're going to use both hands for this. I'm going to make this as easy as I can. But this is the new warm-up I would like you to either switch to or to incorporate into whatever warm-ups you're doing. So we're going to, with our right hand, we're going to do our right hand first, and then we're going to do our left hand, and then we're going to do them together. So with our right hand, with our thumb, we're going to get our thumb on C natural. I'm going to make sure this is in the shot. C natural. With our pointer finger, we're going to do D natural. With our third finger, this finger right here, we're going to do E natural. And then with our fourth finger, we're going to do F natural. And with our fifth finger, we're going to do G natural. So all those keys are right next to each other, right? So let's talk about this in terms of whole steps and half steps. So remember, a whole step and half step is a distance measurement. If you play just one note, that is not a whole step or a half step. That's just a note. So we're going to have a whole step, right? One key in between. Another whole step, one key in between. A half step, right? No keys in between. And then another whole step, one key in between. Now let's get our left hand in position. So feel free to hold your right hand there and leave it there. But now we're going to get our left hand in position as well. It doesn't matter what octave you're playing in. This is just kind of where my camera sits, so this is where I'm playing. So with our pinky, we're going to play that C natural. And then we're going to have a whole step. In this case, that's C to D natural is the whole step. And then we're going to do another whole step. So with our middle finger, with our third finger, we're going to play E natural. And that's our third finger, right? So we have two whole steps. And then we're going to have a half step, right? So that's E to F. There's no keys in between. And that's our pointer finger, right? Or in this case, number 2, if you're using the number finger method. This is 2 on F natural. And then your thumb on G natural, right? And then from F to natural to G natural, we have that whole step, right? So we have whole step, whole step, half step, whole step. So if your right hand, for whatever reason, fell position, take some time to find that positive if you need to, right? But we're going to find whole step, half step, whole step, and on those same keys, we're going to go back down. Try doing that with both hands. The body really likes symmetry, so I wouldn't expect that this is very difficult to do. If you need to, do it right hand. Then left hand. If you're struggling with it, I don't expect it to be this fast either, but I'm just kind of showing as an example. And then together. Remember, this exercise is made up of whole step, half step, whole step, right? So whatever key you're choosing to start on, it's going to be whole step, half step, whole step. Cool. So we're going to start with C on this one, right? So we have C, D, E, F, G. Cool. So now we're going to add just a little bit of a tag to make that exercise a little more interesting. We're going to play what's called the chords of these, the major chords of these, or the one chord. There's so many names for these. So for now, we're just going to call it the arpeggio, which just means broken chord, which means we're just not playing all the notes at once. But what we're going to do is we're going to do our leftmost finger, our middle finger, and then our rightmost finger, middle finger, and then leftmost finger. In this case, the notes would be C, E, G, E, C. So here's what the exercise should look like. As for the warm-up, I want you to switch to. You're going to find whole step, half step, whole step with both hands. And then you're going to play through it, and play through it as evenly as you can, and then follow it with the arpeggio. Now, if that's too fast, you can go as slow as you want. If you want to go... If you want to go that slow, that's fine. If you want to go 10 times slower than that, that's absolutely fine. What I want you to do for these exercises is before you even play the keys, or attempt to play the exercise to the very least, make sure your fingers are on the correct keys, that you have whole step, half step, whole step. And for this, you don't necessarily need to worry about the note names either. I want you more concerned about whole steps and half steps to find those correct pitches. So there are 12 combinations of this, and some of them have multiple names. So right now, I'm going to walk through on the keyboard all those exercises. Remember, this is not nearly as hard as you think it is, I promise. You're just looking for those whole steps and half steps. So that being said, let's move the camera just a little bit. Let's start on this key. Remember this key right here, that group of two black keys. This key to the left can be called C sharp or D flat. Right, so we're going to start with that key. We're going to find a whole step, half step, whole step. So I'm going to walk through that one more time, right? So both of our leftmost fingers, pinky and thumb in this case, are on that D flat or C sharp. We're going to find a whole step. There's one key in between, so it's a whole step. We're going to find another whole step. There's one key in between, so we know that's a whole step. We're going to find a half step. There's no keys in between, so we know it's a half step. And then we're going to finish it with another whole step. And there's one key in between, so we know it's a whole step. And that's then we're going to play the exercise. You'll notice when you're playing on the black keys that your hand is really digging into the keyboard. That's a good thing. Your hand shouldn't be like trying to play on just the edges of the black keys. It's okay for your hand to go in, and it's okay to play the white keys from this part. Even though it is technically harder because of the fulcrum point, it's absolutely fine to play the white keys up here like this. Don't be afraid of having your hand close to the edge or anything like that. Now let's say that maybe I'm going really slow. If you want to go, that's absolutely fine. Just make sure it's even, right? Try to keep it as evenly paced as possible. If you're going and it kind of just sounds like garbled nonsense, slow it down to where you're going even. Right now I'm wanting you to learn this very basic piano shape. If you're using any book, this is pretty much the hand shape, whether they talk about it or not, that your hand is in constantly, at least for many of those beginner books. Cool, so let's keep going. Now we're going to start on D natural. So remember, we're going to use our leftmost finger on both hands, and on our left hand it should be our pinky. Props to you if it's not. And then on your right hand it's your thumb. So we're going to start in D natural. Now we're going to find whole step. Right, there's one key in between, so we know it's a whole step. We're going to find another whole step. So there's one key in between, so we also know that's a whole step. Now we're going to find a half step. There's no keys in between, so we know that's a half step. And then we're going to find a whole step. So there's one key in between, so we know that's a whole step. And then we're going to play the exercise. And at the end, too, if you want to play all the notes you played in the arpeggio at once, those are the major chords of whatever your leftmost finger is playing on each hand, whatever the name of that is. Those are the major chords of that. So in this case, the leftmost note is D. So this note we're playing right now is a D major chord. That's a little advanced, but if you want to do that, it has a nice sound to it. Let's keep going. I'm going to move my camera just a little bit, make sure it's kind of in camera. I wish I had a light here. Oh, maybe I can turn the light on. Oh, I don't know if that's going to make it worse. I'm going to leave it off for now, but if you want the light on, if that kind of helps because of the shadows here, just let me know. So we're going to go to E flat or D sharp. Remember, we're in the group of two. It's the right key, and that's going to be with our leftmost finger, pinky or thumb, dependent on your left or right hand. We're going to do whole step, half step, whole step. Remember, with whole steps, there's one key in between, and with half steps, there's no keys in between. And then we're going to play the exercise. Ooh, I messed up. So if you mess up like I just did, go back and try to do it slower and in order. This certainly isn't a race or anything like that. So you just want to take your time to make sure you're doing it as accurately as you can. What was I going to say? I don't remember. Okay, so let's say the two-handed thing is really overwhelming and you're only doing one hand. That's fine. As you get more comfortable with doing it with both hands, at least attempt doing both hands together. I wouldn't expect that it's super difficult because we're doing what's called symmetric motion, where both of our hands are doing the same type of motion, and our body really likes symmetry, so this should be an easier motion. It'd be much harder if we were doing something like, because our hands are now doing different things, and that can be really confusing for us to think about at first. But if that's the case, practice one hand, and then the other hand, and then attempt them together. And if together doesn't work out, go back to one hand, the other hand, and then practice together. In general, it's not super productive to just constantly go to both hands and then be struggling with both hands. In general, learning that way is just really slow. It's so much easier to just do right hand, left hand, attempt together. Right hand, left hand, attempt together. And then maybe that's not working. Left hand, right hand, attempt together. But you really need to process what those feel like and then attempt to do them together. The more you practice doing this, your brain will adapt to having that coordination to let your hands do that together. And then eventually even allow your hands to do very dramatically different things. It takes a while to kind of adapt to that thinking and that type of coordination. And I'm not super coordinated, so piano is pretty hard for me. I can kind of play pop piano really well, but actual piano repertoire is almost impossible for me. I can kind of fake it and make people believe I can play piano, but I'm by no means a classical pianist. Cool. Let's keep going with our exercise. We're now on E natural. Remember, we're going to do whole step, half step, whole step. And if you need to pause the video and just look at the keys I'm playing and play along with me, that's fine too. Let's keep going. We are going to go to F natural now. So remember, we're finding whole step, half step, whole step. So let's say that you've done this exercise, it's kind of boring, you're really good at it. Here's something you can do to make the exercise a little more interesting. So after you go through it, try adding a repeat where you repeat that whole process but going twice as fast. You don't have to do that, but that's just a slight variation you can add to that exercise to make it a little more interesting. And if you have your own variations you want to add that make it more interesting, feel free. It's certainly not going to hurt anything to find your own and more interesting ways to practice these. The biggest thing is that you are practicing these. So if you wanted to throw in your own variations, that's absolutely fine. So we have just a few more, so let's just try to stick with me. I'm going to try to get that shot without my phone falling off the stand and breaking. Oh, okay, there we go. Okay. So we're going to find G flat or F sharp. If we're in the group of threes, that leftmost key. We're going to find whole step, half step, whole step. If you want to do whatever variation you've thought of to make that easier, that's absolutely fine. We're going to keep going. G natural. So in this case, if you just play all the keys with your leftmost key from G natural, that is what you should be looking for, right? We have whole step, half step, whole step. The only other one like that is C. So G and C actually are all white keys. Right now, I think I mentioned this before, I don't necessarily want you super concerned with G, A, B, C, D, C, B, A, G, G, B, D, B, G. I want you almost thinking just exclusively about whole steps and half steps, getting them to position, and then just moving your fingers. It really doesn't matter if you're going, this one's G, this one's A, this one's B, this one's C. This isn't dart throwing. I just want you kind of going through the motion of, and eventually doing that even smoother than how I just butchered it. Cool, let's keep going. We're going to start on A flat or G sharp. Right, we're going to find whole step, half step, whole step. We're going to do next one. So now we're on A natural. We're going to find whole step, half step, whole step. Two more, we're almost done. We're going to go to B flat or A sharp, right? If we're in that group of three, it's the rightmost key. Whole step, half step, whole step. The last one, we're going to go to B natural. We're going to find whole step, half step, whole step. And this one should actually be the most comfortable in your right hand. It fits the right hand shape very well. It's a little awkward in your left, but it's certainly not the worst one. But in your right hand, this should actually be the most comfortable one. Cool. So if you did that with me, you just did 12 variations of the same exercises. So bravo to you. And if you added your own variations, you even did more than that. That is the warm-up I would like you to be doing on the keyboard. You are more than welcome to keep doing the 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 if you like it. But at this point, I feel that you have enough experience that you don't necessarily need to do that. So I would like you, when you're sitting down to practice, as your warm-up, if you're going through a book or whatever, that's fine, but as your warm-up before you even look at that book, to sit down and go through these 5-note scales that are consisting of whole step, half step, whole step. Now let's say you forget where the whole steps and half steps are. Go to one you know for sure. C is really easy and G is really easy because C and G are all white keys right next to each other. You can look at that and figure out what the whole steps and half steps are, right? From C to D, oh, one key in between, that's a whole step. D to E, oh, one key in between, that's a whole step. E to F, there's no key in between, that's a half step. F to G, there's one key in between, that's a whole step. And we need to know the names, right? You can be like, this thing to this thing, oh, there's one key in between, that's a whole step. Oh, this thing to this thing, there's a key in between, that's a whole step. Oh, no key here, this must, right? You don't necessarily need to know the names. So as you're doing this exercise, if you've forgotten that it's whole step, half step, I'm sorry, whole step, half step, whole step, you can always go back to what you know and even figure it out for yourself, which might be an even stronger way of learning it than just reading what I have written in the description. Cool. So I'm just going to give a brief overview. So we talked about black key names. We talked about whole steps and half steps, sharps and flats. Remember, half steps are our smallest interval we have. It's to the next immediate note, up or down from any given note. A whole step, the simplest definition, is 2 half steps. A sharp is a half step up. A flat is a half step down. And right now we are working on our 5-note scales. There is also a natural sign we talked about very briefly that would cancel out any flats or sharps that possibly exist. If you have any questions, just let me know. This is kind of a longer video, so I'm hoping that you don't have any questions. But that being said, if you have questions, please ask. I certainly have more than enough time to answer.